Good. Here we are. So we left off last time talking. We're at 6A2 in our studies, and we left off with a kind of a side tangent to the discussion of identifying settlements, cities, towns that are mentioned in the Bible, specifically mentioned at the time of Joshua, when we entered the land and took over the land of Canaan. And the question of what are these places today, and vice versa, places that we know about today, meaning that at the time that the Talmud is discussing it, do those places have that kind of ancient history? And this is relevant, of course, to the Purim question, because if there's a walled city from the time of Joshua, then that walled city needs to observe Purim on the 15th. If it's not a walled city from the time of Joshua, then it observes Purim on the 14th. So that's the practical difference. But as a result of that need to know, we go into a lot of questions about these various towns and cities, and trying to identify changes in name and what city has which name. And we have some differences of opinion. So we're in the middle of the on 6A1. We had a whole different a difference of opinion about three different cities: Tiberias and Tzipori, and right. And what was the third one? Right, there was this one, was this one, this one was this one. Tzipori, because we ended up losing one of them and finding it out making it into something else, and now I'm losing it. Tiberias, Tzipori, and so Rakat is Tzipori. No, the Kinneret is and Ginosar, right? Okay, so now the question is about identifying the town of Kitron, which is a biblical name, with the town of Sepphoris, Tzipori, from Roman rabbinic times. And we say that it doesn't seem to be possible for Kitron to be Tzipori. Tzipori is a city in the Galil, and Kitron is now at the top of 6A2. We see verses that identify it as part of the portion of the tribe of Zvulun, which means that it was by the Mediterranean Sea, so at the coastline. So that's the challenge. But then we went into a side question, because we had a tradition that Zvulun, the tribe of Zvulun, was complaining about their gift of land that was given to them by God. They didn't like it. They didn't like the allotment that they got, the real estate that they were given. They were complaining about. So we had the whole story about the chilazon, that God tries to placate them by saying, "Are you kidding? You don't have all of the produce and the wonderful lush fields and orchards of your neighbor, but on the other hand, you've got this precious commodity, the chilazon, which is what makes tchelet, the bluish purple color that we use for making the string for the tzitzit." And we talked about the fact that then the problem with the black market, or with the phony tchelet that ensued, because people really wanted to take advantage of the preciousness of the chilazon. So, so now let's go to the top of 6A2 right-hand side. Okay, then we'll pick up from there. So this is the conclusion of the question. The conclusion of the question is, so in the end, if that's really true that Zvulun had such a wonderful gift from God, why are they kvetching? Right, as if the Gemara never met another human being. If it's all rationally and perfectly makes a lot of sense, why would anybody kvetch? So here we go. So the top of the page, would somebody do us the honor of reading? Okay, Beryl, yay, go ahead.
Now, if it enters your mind to say that Kitron is Sipori, why is Zevulun dissatisfied with his lot? But Sipori is an utterly superior portion of land.
Right. So if we do want to grant that Sipori is Kitron, there would be no reason for Zevulun to complain. Sipori is in the best part of Israel. It's right in the lush, terrific part of the Galilee. Go ahead.
The Gemara anticipates a possible answer. And if you will say that Sipori does not flow with milk and honey, and therefore did not suffice to relieve Zevulun's dissatisfaction, but Reish Lakish has said, I myself have seen the flow of milk and honey around Sipori, and it measured 16 mil by 16 mil.
Okay, so we're not going to go through all of the math. It's down in the notes. You can look at it yourself. But these are huge exaggerations that are basically being said to just extol the abundance, the lushness of the area, the goats, milk, and the figs and the dates and all this kind of stuff. It's unbelievable, miles and miles of it. It's like the phrase obviously comes from the Torah, right? A land flowing with milk and honey, and they take it here, and they use it as a very literal and also just exaggerated discussion. Yes, there's rivers and a flowing of milk and honey. It's unbelievable. What's around Sipori is so terrific. It's so gorgeous and wonderful. So that cannot, if Tzipori is part of Zvulun and Zvulun is on record as being unhappy with their allotment, we've got a terrible contradiction. They could not possibly be unhappy with Tzipori. So therefore, Kitron, which is labeled as a town in the portion of Zvulun, cannot be identified with Tzipori. Go ahead.
The Gemara anticipates another possible answer. And if you will say that although Zevulun had land that flowed with milk and honey, his was not as much as his brother's. But Rabbi Bar Hana has said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, I myself have seen the flow of milk and honey of the entire land of Israel. And it was the equivalent of the area between Kubi and the port of Tulbani, that is 22 parsa long and 6 parsa wide. This proves that Sipori constituted a significant part of the total land that flowed with milk and honey in Eretz Yisrael. Consequently, Sipori could not have been in Zevulun's territory, for if it were, he would not have complained. This poses a difficulty to Zerah, who stated above that Kitron, a city in Zevulun's portion, is the city of Sipori.
Okay, we'll stop here. So just if you read note 30, that'll summarize this whole calculation.
As noted above, note 29, the land of Sipori that flowed with milk and honey measured 4 parsa by 4 parsa, or 16 square parsa. Here the Gemara says that the total of such land in Eretz Yisrael is 22 parsa by 6 parsa, 132 square parsa. Thus, The quality land of Sippori constituted almost 1/8 of the total such land in the entire country. Accordingly, assuming that Sippori is in Zebulun's territory, Zebulun had a disproportionately large amount of land that flowed with milk and honey in relation to the 11 other tribes.
Right. If they had 1/8 of the total abundant, wonderful, luscious land, so that's more than they deserve, right? If everything was equally apportioned, they would have only 1/12. Now they have 1/8, so they got more. So what are they kvetching about? So it can't be that Tzipori is part of their land. They would have no grounds, literally, to complain about it. So now the Gemara answers again.
The Gemara answers that, in fact, Sippori, Kitron, was in Zebulun's portion, and yet he complained for the following reason. Even so, Zebulun complained because he preferred fields and vineyards, and they were lacking in his portion. The Gemara proves this point that Zebulun was particularly desirous of fields and vineyards. This is also borne out by a precise reading of the verse. For it is written, Naphtali was on the high places of the field, which, as stated above, was the basis for Zebulun's satisfaction. Learn from this that Zebulun was especially desirous of fields and vineyards.
Okay, so what the Gemara basically answers in the end is there is no way of controlling what people are going to kvetch about and what they're not going to kvetch about. You think that you're giving somebody a gift that's more than enough, that's really generous and so on, but is that a gift that the person actually wants? Is that a gift that the person actually can relate to? No, you give them the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. Unbelievable. What a terrific gift. But they have no interest in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not what they want. What they want is, a nice hat or something like that. So Zebulun's dissatisfaction had nothing to do with the quality of the land, had nothing to do with the positive or negative aspects of Tzipori. We can imagine that Tzipori was given to Zebulun, and yet Zebulun was saying, but that's not the kind of land that I want. I don't want grazing land. I want farming land. Where did we have something like that actually in the Bible itself? This is at the very brink of when Israel is going into the land of Canaan, to take over the land of Canaan. 2.5 tribes, Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh, come to Moses and said, "We don't want to go. We don't want to go into that land of Canaan because we've got tremendous grazing land here on the other side of the Jordan, in the Gilead. We've got this unbelievable, expansive, it's like the Wild West. We could have our cattle here and graze them here without any kind of problems. It's terrific. We're not interested in the land flowing with milk and honey. It's wonderful. Milk and honey is great. For those people who love milk and honey, a land flowing with milk and honey is terrific. But we don't want to go there. We want a different kind of land." And that practically, causes a crisis. And Moses practically has a heart attack, so to speak. He goes, "Are you kidding? We just wandered for 40 years because the Jewish people didn't want to go into the land, and they all had to die. Now you're going to not want to go into the land again?" Right? So that's the story that happens there. And of course, what in the end is a compromise, that these tribes fight for the land. They go into the land and fight for the land. They become actually the crack troops that are the avant-garde, so to speak, of the armies. So they are the ones that are taking the greatest risks. They're doing all of this, so they said, "We'll do it, but then we don't want the land. We really don't want the land. We will fight for our compatriots, for our brothers and sisters. We'll fight for the other tribes to give them their land. We will sacrifice on behalf of that land, but we don't want it. For ourselves, we want the grazing land." So we see how strongly a connection can be to a particular kind of land. This becomes 1 second, Sylvia. This becomes, very poignant when you get people who are dislocated. When you have, for instance, eminent domain or other kinds of uprootings, where you have, development. This happens all over the world. It happens in the United States, but it happens also, let's say, I was just reading, whenever it was last week, the week before, in I forgot where it was, in Africa, they're building a dam. The dam is going to supposedly be good for creating electricity and water and so on and so forth. On the other hand, it's going to completely flood a valley where people live. And they're going, no, we'll give you something better. And they say, there is no such thing as something better. We've been living here for 1,000 years. What are you giving me something better? There is no such thing as something better. So the connection of a people to a particular land is very, very deep, and it's not it's not something that can be quantified about no, it's worth it for you this way or that way. Sylvia.
Forgive me, I've been sort of jumping in and out of this, but I remember the context why they're having this discussion.
So you came in after I gave the introduction.
I did.
Yes, the context is we're identifying places that have names in the time of the Talmud and trying to figure out if they are identical with the same place with places that have biblical names.
So there's no discussion. There's no reason to say that Zebulun was better. I mean, it's not at some.
You keep freezing.
Don't disrupt me. I'm happy here.
Okay, so that's the basis for why we're having this conversation. Last week we had an extensive discussion, and we're going to have it probably again in another minute or two. That this is also part of. I said it. I'll just try to say it real quick. And it leads out of what I just it flows out of what I just said about people's connection to a land. That's also part of what's being discussed here, in its own way.
So intuitively, the Jewish people's connection to Israel, is that what it is?
Right. So we have a biblical, record, but then we've got breaks, and we've got changes that happen over time. And establishing the connection between our biblical experience of the land and taking the land and being given the land, and now meaning in the time of the Talmud, but as I mentioned last week, it becomes a very live issue again today.
Okay.
Whenever the land is under contention, whenever there's more than one person, more than one party that's trying to take the land, and these issues become acutely important. So at the time that the Talmud is talking about this, we're going to get to it in another minute, the Romans are taking over the land. So the internal discussion in the Talmud about whether this is really our land, this place that we're living in, is this really our place from time immemorial, is very important to them, because they don't have the political power to assert their sovereignty. But they have their own story to tell and to develop, right? This is what we call the narrative. What's our narrative? Yeah.
Can I just sort of give you a completely having nothing to do with the Bible, but everything to do with what's going on the vineyard just today?
Oh yeah.
We have the tribal headquarters of the Wampanoag Indians.
Right. So that's exactly.
And there is an article. There's an article in today's paper saying that the Wampanoags want the right to use the land exclusively that was stolen from them hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And can you park in an area that gives them access to their land?
Right. So I was gonna say that's one detail, and it's all over the entire hemisphere. Right. The taking over of the land, it was this terrible things were done, and it was done a long time ago. How much of that it can be fixed? How much of that can be adjusted? Really, really tough questions, and that's not quite what's happening here, because the Talmudic rabbis have no illusions that they're going to be able to appeal to the Roman Senate and get the right to their land back. That's one of the interesting situations that we have here, is that you have the guilty party, which has theoretically all the power, nevertheless is open to this discussion. That's pretty interesting. That's not
But going
not
back
so
to the-
usual. Yeah.
Going back to the Torah, is there any discussion of inhabitants in the land?
Yeah, we talked about it last week.
We did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know what? There's a recording. You can go back and look at the recording. And you could even listen to the recording. Forget about looking at it.
Right.
You could
Okay.
even listen to the recording.
Thank you.
Yes. No, these are real serious questions, and they reverberate down through time to this very moment. The whole question of Israel and the Palestinians is these questions are part of this as well. Josie. No, you got to unmute.
Muted. Okay. When I took part in this Senior Slam storytelling project about a year ago, there was a woman there whose background was American Indian, African American, Irish, and something else. So she had a very mixed heritage that she was well aware of. And her piece was about something I'd never heard of called the Trail of Tears, of how the Indians were forced from their land somewhere in Oklahoma, I think, across to a reservation that had nothing to do with their background. And it made such an impression on me because I realized that other people have suffered dislocation that we may not even be aware of. And she and her son went back there to sort of walk the Trail of Tears, and that was what her whole piece was about.
Yeah.
It's very, very touching.
Right. So, and I think it's definitely coming up in our time, after being submerged for generations, for a long time, and we have much more awareness of it. And the real painful question is, you can't go backwards in time. How do you make this better? But you have to want to make it better. At least then you can struggle with it. When you've got, for instance, the what was the name of that pipeline that they were doing?
Yeah.
You remember? I don't remember.
Pipeline.
The pipeline, right? So that that was a continuation of the worst kind of aspects of the United States policy towards just stepping on the indigenous peoples and completely not just disregarding them, but trampling them. So yes, we're going to build this pipeline right through this indigenous reservation part. So it's the challenge that we have today. We talked a little bit about it in Bite-Sized Wisdom, and that when we talked about Pirkei Avot, how do we confront this? What kind of choices do we make for ourselves, and then who do we align ourselves with? Who do we support when we see bullies, and when we see people who are absolutely unwilling to acknowledge the injustices of the past, and they want to perpetuate them to this very moment? How do you deal with people like that? It's a big question. All right. We're going to continue now. We're on 6A3. The first paragraph on the left-hand side. Rabbi Abahu said.
Rabbi Abahu said, Scripture states, Ekron shall be uprooted. This is a reference to Caesarea, daughter of Edom, which is situated between the sands, and was a constant source of harassment to Israel in the days of the Greeks. And when the Hashmonean dynasty prevailed and was victorious over them, the Greeks, they called her the captured tower of Shir.
Okay, so here in the concentrated form is a lot of what we were just saying. We go to the next part of the verses that are being brought up here. and we're identifying Ekron with Caesarea. So Ekron is mentioned in the Tanakh, in scripture. Caesarea is a Roman town, right? From the Caesarea, right? Caesar, Caesarea. So take a look at, please, at note 33. That is Ekron.
That is, Ekron is the city known as Caesarea. In scripture, it is called Ekron as a hint that in the future it will be uprooted. Ekron is from Muharsha. The book of Joshua, it is evident that Ekron is included within the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Originally, it was a Philistine city. The Greeks took it over until, as the Gemara states below, they were driven out by the Jews. Later, it was conquered by Rome.
This is Maharsha. Maharsha is a commentator. Go ahead.
Maharsha, Rome is regarded as heir to the biblical nation of Edom, whose founder was Esau.
Okay. So this is the back and forth history of a piece of land or a city, and who runs it, who owns it, who rules over it, and then it gets taken in the very confusing history of the land of Israel. It keeps on changing hands. And there's the up and down here between the Jews being subjugated. That first the Jews, conquering the land, then the Jews being thrown out of the land, then the Jews coming back in the land, then the Jews being conquered again, and so on and so forth. So this city Ekron is prophesied that eventually it will be the play on words. The Ekron teaker, Ekron will be uprooted. So that's a play on words in Hebrew. So which city is this that the prophet is saying, "Go, that bad city, you're going to get your comeuppance. You're going to eventually be destroyed." What is that city? So now we've got a kind of an anachronistic application, and we say this is Caesarea. The prophet is foreseeing that the Roman city of Caesarea will eventually one day be defeated and demolished. This is Caesarea, daughter of Edom. So daughter of Edom, as the note points out, this is a rabbinic way of referring to Rome. Rome is called Edom. Later on, as Rome becomes Christianized, in medieval times, more and more Edom becomes the church, becomes Christianity. But at this point, Christianity hasn't taken over the Roman Empire yet, so it's just Rome. And Rome, of course, is bad enough from the Jewish point of view, right? Rome destroys the Second Temple and demolishes the Jewish community to a substantial degree. So what this statement of Rabbi Abahu is that prophecy from 1,000 years before, that's going to apply to Caesarea. The Romans are not here to stay, right? And their city that they created, Caesarea, which caused so much trouble to the Jews, eventually it will, bite the dust. This beach city, this which today, of course, it's a big in normal times it's a big tourist attraction, and because of the ruins there, and also because of the beautiful beach, so people like to go to Caesarea. It's a gorgeous little spot, but it's also been a place of headquarters. It was the local capital for the Romans. So this is their Rabbi Abahu's angry wish that eventually they will be defeated. So of course the Hashmonaim, they fought against the Syrian Greeks, right? And they took over Ekron, Caesarea, back in that day, and they called it the Tower of Shir. So one of the problems, not problems, one of the this actually reminds me of something I wanted to make sure to say. One of the aspects of this edition that we use, the Schottenstein Art Scroll edition, is that it completely avoids, if it can, any historical scholarship as it applies to the Talmud. So it just uses the traditional commentators and so on. And it doesn't give you any background information that can supplement that. The Steinsaltz edition, which is the basis for the Sefaria text that we have available online, that edition is more than willing to avail itself of contemporary scholarship and archaeology and etymologies and philology and all that kind of stuff. This is this is the volume. It's got Megillah, Moed Katan, and Chagiga of Talmud of the Steinsaltz edition. It's the one that's in Hebrew, not the English one. So it's not exactly the one that's helpful for most people, and that's why Sefaria is using the English. But so for instance, if you look here, when we talked about 2 weeks ago or something about the fish, there's a picture of a fish. There's a picture of the specific fish that ichthyologists have identified to be the fish. So Rashi says it's tuna fish. The ichthyologists today say no, it's sardines. It's not tuna fish. But so the art scroll will only tell you that Rashi says it's tuna fish, and Steinsaltz was willing to say, good, that was Rashi. He knew what he knew, but now we know more. And it's really scientifically this. So he tells us, for instance, that Migdal Shir was actually called, where is it here? Right. It was Migdal Straton, right? It was the Straton Tower. And then it was turned in Hebrew into Migdal Shir. So it's not about singing, although, the rabbis could talk about it that way. But it's taking the word Straton and turning it into Shrashon, and then it's Shir. So fine. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is because this past week, Rabbi Steinsaltz passed away. And I want to recognize that, and I want to acknowledge that he was one of the great scholars of our time. And it wasn't so much his scholarship as his popularization, his making the Talmud accessible to more and more people, his being a representative of the value of learning and encouraging everybody to study Torah. This was an amazing gift that he gave to us. He had that power to inspire people to get things done. I mean, the Steinsaltz Talmud is an extraordinary accomplishment that required money and staffing and support, and then it needed to be out there in the community and accepted in the community. So he was a giant. He was a giant, and he is a loss to the Jewish people. May his memory always be a source of blessing. So, in his honor, I want to just tell one story. I've told it before, but I like to tell it. I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to ask Rabbi Steinsaltz a question that he couldn't answer. So he was one of the preeminent. He knew everything. He knew a ton of everything, and he grew up not being educated Jewishly, and then he became a Baal Tshuva. He joined the Lubavitch movement, the Chabad movement, and of course he became a rabbi. But he had scientific learning, and he had so he had all kinds of Talmudic learning and Hasidic learning and mystical learning and so on. He knew everything. So I was able to ask him a question that he didn't know the answer to. And this happened years ago, back when I was able to go in the summertime to Israel. And what happened was that I was in the neighborhood where I was staying, and I had an appointment to meet another rabbi. And the question was how to get there. I had to find a certain bus in order to get there. And I was running late. I don't always run late, but, every once in a while I run late. So I was running late. I was in a hurry, and I'm running down the street. And I know that the bus stop is around someplace. And I stop this gentleman on the street, and I say, "Excuse me, sir, but do you know where bus number 4 stops?" And he looks at me, his eyes open wide, and he goes, "I'm sorry, I don't know. I can't help you." And then I have to keep running, and he's walking slowly his way. And then it hit me that simple old man was Rabbi Steinsaltz. So, I asked him a question, and he didn't know the answer. One of the few times, in his life when that happened. So, all right. Anyway, like I said, Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory always be a blessing. So back to here. So here we have again the interweaving of the biblical with the contemporary reality of the rabbis in the Talmud, right? And their hopes that the biblical prophecies would be realized in their time with regard to this new set of oppressors. I want to bring just that one more historical convolution, so to speak. It's the Hasmoneans who brought the Romans into Israel. When the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, were fighting against the Syrian Greeks, at that time, the Greek empires, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, were divided up basically the Mediterranean region, but Rome was just beginning. Rome was just beginning to start flexing its muscles, and the Maccabees thought, "Oh, we'll take advantage of these tough new guys, and we'll bring them in as allies for us, and that way we'll be able to defeat the Greeks, and then we'll kick out the Romans, and as a result, we'll be able to reassert our control over the land of Israel, and the game will be ours." What happened wasn't quite like that, and what happened instead was that the Hasmoneans became puppets of the Roman Empire. So they were the ones who invited the Romans in, and then instead of thinking that they could, manipulate the Romans and control the Romans, it happened the other way around. And now, when the rabbis are talking here, the Ekron Teaker, let Ekron be uprooted. They're talking about the Romans, right? And no thanks to the Hasmoneans for bringing them in. Okay. I want to just point out one other thing, and that is that it's 99.9% certain that Ekron is not Caesarea. That Ekron is a town that's much more inland from Caesarea. But the rabbis are using this because they're trying to use that uprooting principle as the basis for what they're praying for with regard to the Romans. Okay, more about Ekron.
More about Ekron. Rabbi Yosef Bar Hanina said, "What is the meaning of that which is written? And I will remove his blood from his mouth, and his detestable things from between his teeth, and he too shall remain for our God." Rabbi Yosef Bar Hanina explains the verse phrase by phrase. "And I will remove his blood from his mouth." This refers to their house of Bamaya. "And his detestable things from between his teeth." This refers to their house of Galiah. and he too shall remain for our God. This refers to the synagogues and houses of learning in Edom.
Okay, so this is a prophecy that was originally offered with the return of the Jews to the land of Israel to start the second commonwealth and build the second temple. So again, we have an anachronism going on here. Edom, which means Rome here, didn't exist yet. But what it meant was that there was a world power, and if you look in the notes, it's being attributed to Tyre. So it's again a Hellenistic power, because what we have is we've got the Persians and the Babylonians coming from this side, and we've got the the Hellenistic forces are coming from the west, right? And the Persians are in the east, and it takes a while. Eventually Alexander the Great defeats the Persians, but there's struggle. But these world powers are in control, and we are just simply pawns, in the game. We get shuttled back and forth from one to the other. But Zechariah, the prophet, is prophesying that eventually all of these big shots, all of these big world powers will be defeated. And the way that the rabbis are reading it is that all of the idolatrous places or all of the idolatrous practices that will be that are part of their civilization. Bamaya means the bamot, the high places where they worshipped idols, and their house of Galaya. Gilulim is also idols and disgusting kinds of idolatrous worship. They'll all be destroyed. They'll all pass away, and rather, in their place will come worshiping God, and all of the territories where Jews live. Jews will be able to be faithful Jews without anybody oppressing them, without anybody hurting them. And in Edom, the synagogues and houses of learning in Edom will be able to be secure, and so on. So again, like I say, this is an anachronistic statement. This is not what Zechariah is talking about. Zechariah is, let's say, 500 or 450 BCE, and we're talking 300 CE, hundreds and hundreds of years later. But this is actually when we have, archaeologically speaking, we uncover all over the Roman Empire, we begin to start finding synagogues. Because the Jews are out, they've been dispersed, they're out in the diaspora, and they try to create some kind of meeting places for themselves, some kind of centers. And these centers, batei knesiot u batei midrashot, houses of gathering or prayer houses, eventually they became the synagogues that we know today, and the houses of learning. These places will not be in danger, which is what they were at this point, but rather they'll be able to be to thrive. So this is again the wishful thinking of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. The verse continues.
The verse continues, and he shall be like a chief in Judah, and Ekron shall be like Yehusi. This refers to the amphitheaters and circuses of Edom, where the princes of Judah are destined to teach Torah in public.
Okay, so Ekron is again mentioned here. Ekron shall be like Yevusi. Yevusi is the Jebusite place identified with Jerusalem. So if we understand Ekron again to be Caesarea, what we have is this vision that the Kulturkampf, the struggle between two cultures, the Roman culture, the Roman civilization, and the Jewish civilization, that struggle will eventually be resolved in our favor, and those big, gigantic stadiums and amphitheaters and circuses that the Romans created for their populace, They'll, instead of being places of entertainment and gladiators and so on, they will be arenas for the study of Torah. Right? So this is again a dream that is being used here as a kind of a hope and a consolation. Go ahead.
More about Ekron. Rabbi Yitzhak said, Leshem is Pamiat,
Pamias. This time the S is a real S.
is Pamias. Ekron shall be uprooted. This is Caesarea, daughter of Edom, which is a metropolis of kings. Some say that kings were raised there, and others say that kings were appointed from there. Regarding Caesarea and Jerusalem, if someone tells you that both of these places are laid waste, do not believe it. If he says that both are settled, do not believe it. If he says that Caesarea is laid waste and Jerusalem is settled, or Jerusalem is laid waste and Caesarea is settled, you may believe it. As it is said, I shall be filled with her that is laid waste. This teaches that in regard to Israel and Rome, if one is filled, the other one is laid waste. And if the other one is filled, this one is laid waste. That is, at all times, one of them is ascendant and the other is subjugated. And another source for this concept, Rav Nachman bar Yitzhak said that this concept is derived from here, and one kingdom shall be stronger than the other kingdom.
Okay, so what we have here is, again, in a kind of a homiletical style, the statement that it's either us or them. Right? Either Rome will triumph, or we will triumph. And the prophecy is eventually we will have the last word and we will have the final victory. But until such time as that happens, there are ups and downs. The seesaws of history will continue. But it can't be a peaceful coexistence. This is his statement here, Rabbi Yirmiyah. It can't be a peaceful coexistence. Either when Rome is ascendant, we will be downtrodden and oppressed, or if Rome if we're able to eliminate Rome, then we will finally be able to be free and thrive. It can't be both. Yeah, Sylvia.
You said something a moment ago that suggested that the diaspora was sort of a dispersion, a natural dispersion. I had always thought that, particularly in the time of the Romans, that many of the Jews were sent to Rome to work as slaves or whatever it was. What's the current feeling about that?
I didn't say natural dispersion. I said dispersion, and the answer is all of the above. There were diaspora communities that the diaspora predates Rome. The diaspora existed once we had the Babylonian exile. The diaspora was a major reality in Jewish life. And in terms of numbers, I don't think anybody would question that the diaspora actually had the bulk of the Jewish world population. But the diaspora was fluid. And the diaspora for a long time was mostly based in the East because of the Babylonian power. And it's like migrations today. Where do people migrate? They don't migrate to where power isn't. They migrate to where power is, because that's where the resources are. That's where the possibilities are. That's where the potential for a new life is. So either you get thrown around and exiled and uprooted by one of these great powers, or while you're uprooted, you then have to gravitate to places where you can find the possibility of a new life. So there was plenty of subjugation. There was plenty of enslavement. There were many Jews that were put into slavery and in the end probably lost to us. Here and there, Jewish communities tried to redeem captives and slaves and so on. And then they established communities where they could. So the dispersion would start possibly, let's say, with the Romans in 70, throwing a lot of people out of their homes and bringing all kinds of slaves to different parts of the Roman Empire. But eventually people got freed, or other people decided to leave the impoverished land of Israel and seek their future someplace else. And of course, this is also what makes Jews an urban people. You know, we had this whole discussion about the land of Israel, and Zebulun wants fields and this and that. The original picture of the Torah is that we are a people of the land, that we are a people of farming. But Jews are famous, notorious for being a cosmopolitan people and being an urban people. And that's because of our dispersion and because of our exclusion from having a land and exclusion from having roots in anybody else's land. So we established communities wherever we were. We established communities all over the Mediterranean basin, and we were very, we wandered. We wandered, and we set up, our homes wherever we could. So it's a combination. So back to here. So the Rabbi Yirmiyah's, again, his point being that there is, a kind of a competition or a conflict that will be ongoing with no possibility of permanent compromise. It's either Edom or it's Israel. And then we have at the end, the last short paragraph that we read, Ula'om mila'om yematz. That verse, and one kingdom shall be stronger than the other. Or one kingdom shall try to overpower the other kingdom. That would be another way of translating it. Or one people will try to overpower the other people. This verse comes from the message that that Rivka is given by God when she has her painful pregnancy, and she doesn't understand why I'm in such excruciating pain. She goes to seek an answer from God, and God says, "You have two peoples in your womb." Right? And this is Jacob and Esau. So in the rabbinic reading of this is the prophecy of the eternal conflict between Jacob, which is Israel, which is the Jewish people, and Esau, who is called Edom. Edom becomes Rome, and then eventually Edom becomes the Christian church. So this is the ongoing flow of the antagonism and the irreconcilable conflict between these two cultures, civilizations, peoples, religions, however you want to do it. So this is the identification that this is going to constantly happen, and it's like a wrestling match that never ends. Somebody's always on top, but it can't be both people on top. It can't be both of the wrestlers. Either Jacob will be on top, or Edom will be on top, until in the end the prophecies will come true, and the victor will be finally declared to be the Jewish people. Okay, here we go. We're moving right along.
Another teaching from Rav Yitzhak regarding Edom, Esav, and Rav Yitzhak also said, "What is the meaning of that which is written? Let favor be shown to the wicked, yet he will not learn righteousness. It is an allusion to follow. It is an allusion to the following conversation. Isaac said before the Holy One, 'Blessed is he, master of the universe. Let favor be shown to Esav.' The Holy One, 'Blessed is he,' answered him, He is a wicked man. Isaac then said to the Holy One, Blessed is he. Has he not learned righteousness? That is there not one righteous thing about him? The Holy One, blessed is he, answered him, In the land of uprightness he will deal wrongfully. That is, he will destroy Jerusalem. Isaac then said to the Holy One, Blessed is he. If so, he will not behold the majesty of Hashem.
Okay. So here we have one of the many discussions in Midrashim that deal with the whole question of the relationship between Isaac and Esav, and of course Jacob. The whole contention between the two of them, and the biblical story about how Jacob had to trick his father, apparently, in order to get the blessing, so that the Jewish people would eventually be able to survive and to thrive, as opposed to Esav getting the blessing. If Esav got the blessing, from the rabbinic point of view, that would have been it. That would have been disaster. But the biblical story tells us, of course, that Isaac loved Esav, and that Isaac wanted to give the blessing to Esav. So this is a perpetual question. How could the righteous, supposedly all-knowing Isaac is in communion with God, how can he not get it that Esav does not deserve the blessing? So we have this dialogue between Isaac and God with regard to Esav. So the first part is, he says, let favor be shown to Isaac. Isaac, to Esav. Let favor be shown to Esav. Isaac, I love Esav. I want Esav to be supported and be blessed. So God, that's, let's agree that that's what should happen. So the answer that God gives is, no, you don't get it. Esav is no good. Okay, so, and again, this is not apparent at all in the biblical story. This is a retrojection by the rabbis because they identify Esav with Rome. So Rome has proven itself to be an evil empire, to coin a phrase, and that's Esav. They come from Esav. And so God says, don't you understand? Esav is bad. Esav is evil, wicked. So then Isaac said to him, has he not learned righteousness? Right? Wait a second, didn't I raise him? What are you telling me he's wicked? I raised him. I taught him everything I know. He's grown up in the house of righteousness. So he's been imbued with righteousness. What are you telling me that he's wicked? That would be one way to read it. But the way that we have it here is there not one righteous thing about him? This is the way they translate it here, as opposed to, he has learned righteousness. Hasn't he learned righteousness? That's the literal translation of the phrase. But this is colored by the idea that, okay, maybe Esav is not so good, but there's no saving, redeeming aspect of him. He doesn't have anything going for him at all. And then God says, let me tell you, he is going to destroy Jerusalem. Right? He is going to do all of this terrible stuff. And then the Midrash has it, so then therefore Isaac backs down and says, okay, I get it. I understand that he shouldn't be blessed, and I understand that he, on the contrary, let him be excluded from seeing the majesty of God. So this is, again, making also Isaac see the light, so to speak, even though his eyes are dimmed in the Bible, and also a kind of way of saying, no, Isaac wasn't fooled. Isaac understood that this was the wrong thing for to bless Esav. Okay, let's look at note 51.
This follows Rashi. Maharsha,
Maharsha.
however,
Maharsha.
Maharsha, however, explains that Isaac said Esav did not learn Torah, which is called righteousness, and therefore cannot be held responsible for his bad deeds. Rather, they must be considered unintentional acts. The Holy One, blessed is he, replied that the destruction of Eretz Yisrael and the temple was performed by Esav intentionally.
Okay, so here's another way of reading the words. Right, so now the words are not hasn't he learned righteousness, but rather he hasn't learned righteousness. So why are you angry at him? Right, so you just flip around a little bit, the syntax. So according to that way of explaining it, Isaac is trying to defend. He says, I know he's a wild animal. I know that he does all kinds of terrible things. But how can you blame him? The guy hasn't really learned. He's a guy that hasn't sat at my knees. The exact opposite, in other words, way of looking at things. This is, again, a kind of a standard way of defending the Jewish people or troubled adolescents, right? How can you blame them? They can't help themselves. They haven't actually been given a good education. People that haven't been taught right from wrong, people that don't have that kind of upbringing. You can't blame them when they act out. So that's another way of reading this. And then God says, that's all fine for right now for Esav himself in your experience. But eventually Esav will grow up and Esav will be responsible for what he does. And growing up means centuries later. And eventually Esav will know exactly what he's doing. Esav will destroy Jerusalem. And that's something that Esav can't be defended by saying, oh, he doesn't know. He's just a young, uneducated, deprived person. So that's another way of reading it. There's another way that they don't quote here. I forgot who's the one who suggests it. That's actually a little bit truer to the biblical story, and that is to read it again as, but hasn't he shown that he has learned some righteousness? Not in a wondering kind of question. Isaac says, isn't there anything? But the opposite. Isaac says, look at how he treats me. Look at what a good son he is to me. Look at how respectful he is. He has one righteousness for sure. He is a person who completely fulfills the mitzvah of kibud av va'em, of honoring their parents. So, and that's very biblical. That actually is what the Bible tells us about Esav, that he's always going out. Isaac says to Esav, go out and get some food like you always do for me. You're always such a good son. You always make me these delicious meals. And then he he goes out, and when he comes in with the food, he says, Father, here I am. I brought you exactly what you always wanted. So the picture that we have in the Torah is that apparently Esav is a loyal son. That he's a very good son. I forgot the name of it. Maybe somebody remembers. There's a movie with James Cagney. So we'll get to Stuart's question in a second. There's a movie with James Cagney. He's like a crime boss. He's some terrible murderer.
Oh yeah.
But he's devoted to his mother. Right, that's the one thing, and that's in the end that's his downfall, is that he gets captured because he needs to be with his mother. So I forgot the name of the movie, but that's like the classic thing, right? My mother, who grew up on the Lower East Side, who knew all of the gangsters, all the Jewish gangsters down there, she said that's the way. They were gangsters, they were murderers. But then they were very nice to the little old lady when she crossed the street, and to their own aged parents. They were very soft and protective of them. So So that's what Isaac is saying. Yeah, but come on, Esau was a good son to me, or is a good son to me. Stuart asks a question, and that is, if we take that other interpretation, that how can you blame Esau? He never learned Torah, so he can't be held responsible for all the terrible things that he does, all the trouble that he gets into. So Stuart asks, well, isn't that Isaac's fault? Shouldn't Isaac be held responsible for that? Um, Somebody want to respond to that?
Well,
Yeah.
Isaac could have tried his best, and Esau just couldn't absorb or connect to these teachings. So you can't say Isaac didn't try. We don't know. Maybe he did.
Yeah. Sylvia.
I'm thinking it's a familial issue
Yeah.
because Isaac had a brother whose father didn't teach him, if you will.
Right. So that Isaac's brother is Ishmael.
Right.
Right. So we have a little bit of a repetition. Ishmael gets run
Right.
out of town.
And is this an excuse for that can be used today? You know, that the bad blood between Islam and Judaism can be blamed on that.
Is there bad blood?
I think there is probably.
Rabbi?
Yeah. But so wait 1 second. I think that's Rich. Is that Rich talking?
Yeah.
1 second. So we have two things here. First, we have history. That's what Sylvia is saying, that there's a history of problematic family relations here. So that's one way to contextualize this. And yes, Isaac is a failure, maybe in the same way that Abraham was a failure. All right, that's a provocative way of looking at it, and some people would accept it, some people wouldn't. I think what I'm hearing from Josie is something a little more general, and it's not about the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael and Esau. It's about the problems of parents and children. Parents can try their best, but parents cannot guarantee how their kids are going to turn out. And parents are not going to be able to guarantee that their kids are going to actually listen to them and take in the lessons that they try to give them. The most basic example of that is God and Israel. God keeps trying to teach us and teach us and teach us and teach us, and we are, the worst students you could possibly have. God can't control that. I think that a lot of times, that's a heartbreaking reality, that parents try, and then they don't necessarily succeed in grabbing their child's spirit and loyalty and attention and all that kind of stuff. I remember it was such a tragedy. I remember years and years. This is a long time ago. In a synagogue that I was at, two people, a couple, who were the most sweet people in the world. They were such good, generous people, and part of their goodness and generosity was expressed by the fact they adopted a child. And that's a courageous and unbelievable step to take, right? They adopted a child, and they raised this child the best that they could for a number of years, and finally they gave up. And they said, we cannot raise this child. It's almost the biblical story of the rebellious son. And they gave the child to the authorities. And they said, we give up. The kid, we cannot influence this child. We cannot discipline this child. We cannot control this child. And it was heartbreaking. And there's no way to point a finger at these people. If you only would have spoken this way, if you only would have done that, what's wrong with you? This is the mystery of human beings. So I wouldn't be so fast to quick to point a finger that Isaac did something wrong here. Somebody else wanted to say something. Rich, yes.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I'll pass.
All right. All right. So we've got another couple of minutes, and let's
Rabbi?
see. Yes. Oh, where? What?
David Candace. On the other hand, what is the evidence of Isaac's influence on Jacob? Jacob sitting in his tent studying. Do we know it? We're talking about his influence on Esau, and what is his influence on Jacob? It's just hard to know, I think. I don't know.
Well, there is not hard to know. It's impossible to know. There is no knowing. All of this is midrashic extrapolation. We have to be very careful when we take the midrashic stories. We have to be careful when we read the Torah itself, and we have to be a little bit honest about where the Torah gives us grounds for imagining certain things or doesn't give us grounds. And even when it gives us grounds, we're still imagining. We're still creating scenarios based on our own sense of human living, of the kinds of context that we live in, and that's what the rabbis are doing. What the rabbis are doing, they're speaking about Esav and Yitzchak, but they're not. They're speaking about their own reality. They're trying to understand. They're trying to fill in the gaps in a story that is very rich and evocative, but at the same time missing so much information. So they give us a speculation like this. They give a speculation like that. Midrashim contradict each other, and that's fine. That's the whole point. The whole point is that they're not telling you the absolute flat out inside story about what happened in Isaac's family. They're talking about families, and they're talking about Jewish history, and they're talking about the cultural strains of being a Jew, in their environment and so on. I don't know if everybody saw the chat. Stuart wanted to clarify. He wasn't trying to blame Isaac. He was trying to say this brings up a shortcoming on Esav's part, that Esav wasn't willing to listen to the education. Esav wasn't willing to sit there. David is asking here, Jacob is the ideal student. Who's he studying with? Is he studying with Isaac? It never puts them both in the same tent studying together. So these are all part of our own imaginings of what's going on.
I'll take the imagination further. We see that Rivka, I don't know what the right word is, advances Yaakov, takes care of Yaakov, but
Right.
maybe she's abandoning of Esau. Maybe. And maybe that's a reason for Esau to...
Right. So these are good questions. And those are the kinds of questions, again, that's where the text, you need to approach the text. If you have that kind of question, you go back to the text. Is there anything in the text that can tell me something, that can give me a hint to answer that question? If there is, then you've discovered a new layer in the text. If there isn't, then you don't have, something to go on, and then you have to go with one line of story or another line of story. That's part of what it means to live within the learning of these stories. We study these Torah portions every year, and we uncover all kinds of details that we didn't pay attention to the previous time. So when we get to that, God willing, let's try to remember that question, and let's see if there's actually anything in the text that can help us think about that. All right, so you know what? We're not going to go further now. This is the end for today. I hope everybody still has the PDFs and so on, because we're going to go into 6b next time. Okay?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye.